Welcome to Life by Design. I'm your host, Robyne, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this space for real conversations about how we live, how we show up day in and day out, because the quality of our life is shaped by our habits. What we do in ordinary time allows us to be extraordinary. We can unpack what it takes to truly live well and be well in real life. Welcome to Life by Design. And I'm just so excited that you're here. Jordana Goldlist. Now, she is a criminal defense lawyer in Toronto. She has a boutique firm. It is her firm. She is someone who has actively created one of the most epic comeback stories that I have ever heard. She went from being unhomed, living on the streets, addicted in Toronto, like again, as a teenager, to becoming one of the most prominent criminal defense lawyers in all of Canada. And Jordana meets with us today. She talks openly about her struggles, what she was able to accomplish, and how she was able to build this remarkable career to be able to do the work that she is doing professionally and personally. I am so excited for you to hear more about her story. So please check out this episode on Life by Design. Jordana, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to spend time with you today here.
Thank you so much for having me on. I always love spending time with you.
Well, thank you so very much. And for folks who perhaps hadn't had a chance to listen to our previous episode, could you tell the listeners a wee bit about who you are and what you're up to these days?
Sure. So Jordana Goldlist, I'm the owner of JHC Criminal Law, which is a boutique criminal defense firm. We're based out of downtown Toronto, but we operate across Southern Ontario. Focuses on high risk criminal litigation. So a lot of people come to me when they have a very difficult case and they need someone who's just prepared to take it to trial. Normally the stakes are so high that it's not the type of case that's resolvable. So, significant drug trafficking, firearms offenses, homicides, things of that nature, anything that sort of has that high risk in the litigation process. Been doing that for about the last 16 years now. Had my own practice for the last 12 of those 16 years. And on the side, somehow, some way, I also do content creation and have a podcast of my own that is based on my TED Talk from 2018 called Who Judges the Judge.
Yeah. And that TED Talk is powerful. Like
Thank you.
that is one of those when people talk about like TED Talks that really just kind of change thinking. And oh my gosh, yours was absolutely one of them. And I love that your TED Talk actually sparked your podcast, Who Judges the Judge. And again, I feel like there's so many misconceptions about, first of all, behavior plus criminal behavior, and
Yes.
also this idea of right and wrong and how people get to where they are. And the work that you're doing is extraordinary. It's very hard work that you're doing. And to become a leading prosecutor, like defense attorney in our country, like your journey here was not linear. And would you tell us a wee bit about how you go from a teenager who was unhomed to literally doing what you're doing right now? Because that is a remarkable journey.
You're so politically correct. Unhomed. Yes. No, I no qualms about, really ripping the band-aid off on what my life looked like. I'm a very outspoken artist. I was a teenage street
Yeah.
junkie. I was at the very
Yeah.
uh bottom of the barrel, like in the trenches of hardcore drug addiction, and managed to climb my way out. When I was around 20 years old, I finally got myself back into high school, graduated high school at 21, started at university at York. Didn't really have much of a direction. I had when I was finishing my high school, my English lit teacher gave me a book about existentialism, like a branch of philosophy,
Yeah.
and it just resonated with me. And
Yes.
so I got to undergrad and I was like, all right, I'm going to study philosophy and see where that takes me. I also studied psychology and sociology, but philosophy just stuck. And I didn't appreciate when I started down that path that it's one of the best precursors to a law degree
Mhm.
because of the way it teaches you how to
Yes.
think And so I just went on the journey of philosophy. I didn't think that I was ever going to become a lawyer. I wasn't even going to apply, more based on my history than anything else, even though it's what I
Yes.
wanted to do when I was a little kid. Like that was my childhood dream, was to be a lawyer. But I was like, I crushed
Wow.
that in my teenage years. So there's no way I'm
Yeah.
sort of getting to that point. And then just took the risk of putting in an application. Really, I didn't think I was going to get in. I applied for law school so that in 20 years I couldn't look back and say, "Oh shoot, I should have
Yes.
tried." It was really just like, let's
Yeah.
prove that I'm going to fail at this so that I can rest
Yeah.
assured knowing that. But I obviously got in. Osgood Hall sent me an early
Mhm.
acceptance, and I was like not prepared for it all.
Wow.
So I had to make some very significant lifestyle changes. But
Yeah.
did that in my first semester of law and really never looked back. So in 2 weeks' time, I will be celebrating 22 years of being drug free. And have
Oh
really,
my.
uh, yeah, and have just used that time and not for my own career, but part of being honest about what my lifestyle is about was to try to just be an example that
Yes.
those junkies that you pass by on the street can be something else and can be something meaningful, right? Like there's
Yes.
a human in each of those people. And I know that that's like a controversial thing to say and should be so obvious, but sometimes it's hard for people to equate the potential in someone who's suffering with their
Yeah.
actuality, and I really wanted to be, an example that we can get out and we can really try to do some good in the world, so I try to do that as much as possible too.
Yeah. And I'm just like in awe of how someone goes from navigating a very complicated addiction, living on the streets, downtown Toronto. Like people can imagine what that is like in terms of like walking by somebody who is in that very, very desperate state, right? Like that
Yeah.
is somebody who is hurting. That is someone who is just having like a trajectory that does not look anything like possibility, and somehow you pull yourself out of that situation. And what were some of the factors, because I appreciate it's not usually just one thing, what were some of the factors that allowed you to, again at 20, have this massive life change that set the trajectory of where you got to go from there?
I mean, the change was incremental, and I think that's where a lot
Mhm.
of people get stuck. Like, I didn't stop doing drugs and think, "Okay, I'm now gonna go to university and law school, and then I had this
Yeah.
amazing, successful career, and life was gonna be good." It was like, I was dying out there, and he knew that I was dying out there, and I knew that I didn't wanna die. Like, it was that
Yeah.
small. It was like, "Okay, I need to get sober in order to just exist as a human." And
Yeah.
so, went to rehab. When I successfully completed a rehabilitation program, my mom let me move back home. And it was just small, with small steps. I was
Oh,
like, okay, I'm,
yeah.
19 years old. I should go back to high school because I can't support myself
Mhm.
otherwise. And so went back to high school. And there
Yeah.
wasn't a goal of like what would be
Yeah.
next. It was like just incremental. And I always tell people like,
Yeah.
you don't need to think big picture. Although if that helps
Mhm.
you, to dream, by all means, I'm also like a really big dreamer. But that was
Yes.
never the goal. It was like, okay, let's just stay sober. Let's
Yeah.
finish high school, and then I needed to do something else afterwards. And I was like, okay, well,
Right.
I know that I want big things in life, and I know that I want to be able to support myself financially. So I got to do more than just high school. So let's go to university and figure it out from there.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of, like, small incremental steps along the way, and each one building on the next, and it was about always having, like, a next goal, and as long as I had a next goal, then I could
Yeah.
complete the one that I was currently in.
Yeah, and I love what I hear you saying is the fact that like in the dire darkest moments, it was literally just I don't want to die.
Yeah.
And we talk a lot in my research on resiliency about when somebody is drowning, whatever the situation is, the goal is just get them to the shore. We don't think about, well, what are they going to do once they get to the shore, or how did they get themselves in that position? That's not the time for reflection. It's not the time for forward thinking. It's literally, what do we do to get them to the shore? where they can be safe. And then once they are safe, then we can start co-creating and imagining what are those right steps in the right direction that they can take to build a future. And what I'm hearing you say is that, again, in that moment, you found that will to just do something to stop where you were at, and then you were able to use the program, being able to figure out, get some clarity, did some relationship repair with your mom to be able to earn that trust to come back home. Like, that is a substantive amount of effort that we know not a lot of people are able to do that. And so I'm really curious, when you think about who you are and how you made those decisions and navigate it, is there anything in particular about your personality or your temperament or even just your lived experience to that point that made you able to do what you needed to do to stay alive and get clean?
I mean, I think I've always had this like interesting combination of being really independent and yet really creative. And so I think my
I get that.
independence allowed me to leave behind all the people that I need to leave behind. A lot of people who
Mhm.
aren't able to get clean tell me that, if they have some period of sobriety, their relapse starts with running into seeing someone that they used to use
Yes.
with or be in a particular place. And, anyone who's done the 12-step program knows that like the key things to
Mhm.
stay away from are people, places, and things that remind you of
Yeah.
using. And, getting sober it's a very lonely experience because
Yes.
you're surrounded by people generally in use, and then you go into a
Mhm.
world that like you don't know how to navigate, and that's the world being sober, and it's very lonely.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think the ability to just be independent and not need
Yeah.
to revisit those people and those places that I
Yeah.
knew could bring me down really helped with my sobriety
Yeah.
significantly. I cut off everybody. I changed my
Yeah.
number. I didn't
Mhm.
visit anywhere that I used to. Like people didn't know if I was dead, if I had gone to jail. Like
Yeah.
nobody knew from that lifestyle because when I ran into people
Yeah.
many years later, they were like, "You're still alive? Like we heard
Yeah.
all of these rumors that you'd been killed." And I was like, "No,
Yeah.
alive. I've reinvented myself, but
Yeah.
nonetheless alive." So I think that was part of it. And then I was always creatively looking for ways to stay away and
Mhm.
ways to like maneuver through a world that I didn't feel comfortable in. And I think that it
Yeah.
takes a bit of, you know, create forging your own path, which requires you
Mhm.
to think a little bit creatively, a little bit outside the box, because you
Yeah.
can't function the way that everybody else functions. Right? I couldn't do
Yeah.
school the way that everybody else did school. I wasn't built for that after,
Yeah.
dropping out for 3 years and living on the streets and living this whole different lifestyle, and especially at that age, right? Like, what
Yeah.
20-year-olds cared about, I couldn't care less about. I was like,
Mhm.
once you've been through trenches like that, it's really hard to, like, associate with people who haven't been through it. Doesn't have to be the same experiences, but also,
Mhm.
like, life experiences, and that doesn't
Yeah.
end.
Mhm. Yeah. And I very much appreciate that idea about the loneliness and also that inner independence. And one of the things that I've talked about and we talked about on your podcast was the fact that, like, when people are like, wow, you really committed to school after, I had my troubles, it was because I literally had nothing else. Like, I had no friends. I could not go back or do anything that I used to do. Like, essentially it was like this hard stop, and the only variable that was consistent from my past to my future was actually my family. Like, there was not a single part of me before that came forward except for my family, not a single friend, absolutely nothing at all. And the only thing I could do was I just kept going to school, right? Like, cause that just made sense. It was like, this is what I can do. But I also, and I'm curious what your experience was sitting there, first year, now you're at York University, you're sitting in that lecture hall, you're studying philosophy, and, like, I would just imagine, like, you would feel like probably a bit othered in the sense that what other typical 20-year-olds and 21-year-olds are thinking about and imagining, like, you're in a different sphere. Like, your life experience has put you in a completely different place. And so how does someone in their early days of sobriety sit there in a university hall with pressure and stress and all of the other things around you and figure it out? What does that look like?
I mean, I was never trying to fit in. I didn't
Right.
really care. I wasn't there to make friends. I made friends, like,
Yes.
I wasn't like a recluse. I
Yeah.
I
Yes.
social, but I don't, I didn't care, right? I knew I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to earn a degree that was gonna allow me to have a life on the other side
Got it.
of that degree. And I knew, and I'm still like this to today, the more I learn, the more I grow, the sort of further I get in my life and in my career, the further I am from that lifestyle that almost killed me, right? And I knew that.
Right.
I knew that I needed
Yeah.
to do things that took me out of, that ditch that I had been living in, figuratively, but
Yeah.
realistically. Like, I knew that I needed
Mhm.
to get as far away from, you know, that lifestyle as I could, because the more distance I could create, the harder it would be for me to go back to it. And it haunts you,
Totally.
right? Even at this
Yes.
stage of life, 5 years ago when my mom died, like, my brain started having like dreams about using drugs again, even though at that point I was
Yeah.
still like almost 2 decades out of it. And while awake, I never wanted to, but I would have literally, I would fall asleep and have these dreams that I was using. And I was like, what
Yeah.
is going on? It's something that
Yeah.
really, it stays with you. There's things
Yeah.
we do in life that you can't have a complete break from, but the further away I could
Yeah.
get, and I knew that, I just
Yeah.
intuitively knew that if I could create distance between me and that lifestyle, it would be harder for me to go back. And it is, because I have
Yeah.
so much more to lose. So I think that when
Yes.
I'm sitting in that first year university class and I'm looking around, I know I don't fit in. I'm not trying to fit in. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to get
Got it.
really good marks and build a life for myself. That's what
Yeah.
I'm there for.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do just want to present and hold space. I remember the first time you and I met, we were at an event and we both had a shared experience with losing our moms who were so important in our lives. And, that moment of just like, oh my goodness, it's just remarkable that, the stories that we experience. And again, different paths, different challenges, different stressors and whatnot. And being on the other side of it and just knowing how integral our moms both were in our own recoveries and how special those women are. And I know I just remember instantly when I was sitting beside you, and just also to hold space, like, Jordan, I have met some pretty remarkable people in terms of like, gosh, like astronauts, like professional athletes, like Olympians, and you by far are the baddest badass I have ever met in my life. Like, I remember sitting beside you just being like, I have met people who have gone to space. I have literally met Olympians, professional athletes, they got nothing on you. Like, you have just this energy and this like clarity and confidence of, I know exactly who I am. I know exactly who I am not. And you have like carved out this wildly successful life, and like you're good. Like, it's so inspiring to see a woman who has experienced such adversity to be so successful professionally, but also personally, in their own health and their own growth and their own understanding. And like you're just doing your thing and not bothered by all the noise. And I just, again, as I said, the kids would say you have aura like next level of in terms of the energy that you bring. And so now let's fast forward. Here you are, this wildly sought after, this woman who is there in these very high risk, a lot of also like a media attention on the cases that you're doing. And you show up each and every day with these very long, stressful scenarios. And like you just continue to deliver like case after case. Like, how do you do that?
I mean, I don't think I started out. You start off with smaller cases and you learn. And for me,
Yeah.
I think it's part of the same personality traits that I had when I was using drugs, right? Like,
Okay.
always wanted more, and I always wanted to take it to another level, which is how I got so sick in my addiction, and
Mhm.
how I knew that it was life or death, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be dramatic. Like, I
No,
had had
it is.
a I had a near fatal drug overdose when I was 18, and I knew that if I didn't stop using, I would always want to feel that way again. Like, I knew that. I know that the high that almost killed me was going to be the high that I was going to keep chasing, and it would eventually kill
Yeah.
me. There was no question. And so I really felt like I had no choice but to stop. But that need to always take things to another level, that need to always push the boundaries as much as I
Mhm.
can is also what has helped fuel my success in my career because I've always wanted
Yes.
that high risk case. I've always wanted the more difficult case. Like so many people are like, "Oh, what's your win to loss ratio?" And the lawyers who are winning 100% of the cases they take to trial are only taking to trial like the guaranteed
Winner.
winners. You're
Yes.
not
Yeah.
taking the difficult cases, the cases that are truly like going to cause you to force you to really get creative, strategic, break things down in ways that are sometimes controversial, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes like that's what motivates me and that's what my clients come
Yeah.
to me for. So I think that, for me, it's easier to exist in that high pressure
Mhm.
situation because without that high
Yeah.
pressure, without that demand, I'm bored. And when I'm bored, I can't put
Yeah.
my all into it. And I think the type of work that defense lawyers do, like we have to put ourselves into it because you have on the other side of that table a client who depends on you. And I think
Yeah.
when
Absolutely.
lawyers get complacent in their work and they're like, "Oh, it's just another file," like, I've never treated my
Yeah.
cases like a file. And, maybe
Yeah.
it's because of the experience that I have. I always say to my clients, "If I was in your shoes, this is what I would want my lawyer to do for me, and this is how I
Yeah.
propose to do it," and I take my instructions from my clients. But, I
Yeah.
have always thought of the person and the situation and the family that they have,
Mhm.
that is going to be affected by the outcome of their case. Like
Yeah.
that's the reality and I have to consider all of those factors, but it's that high risk scenario that sort of gets me out of bed and drives me every day to
Yes.
do what I do.
Yeah, that fuels you to that degree of excellence. Now, I appreciate what you're, again, the work you do, it's so fascinating. And what it brings top of mind to me is I recall, like, as a student, when I was going through my studies, I was working in Kingston Penitentiary. At the time, it was still in play. And I was actually in the regional treatment center that was inside of the walls of KP. And I remember meeting so many of these inmates and you would part of my job was to take their stories, like literally like doing the psychoeducational assessment, like their first experiences and all the way through. And I remember looking at some of these cases and it was like, it's no wonder you are sitting in a maximum prison, like that society had literally thrown you out when you were very young. And it would actually have been more abnormal that these people could have healthy lives outside of the being incarcerated when you hear their stories. Like in some cases it almost felt like this was inevitable from very early years. And I remember in that moment talking to my supervisor about like, where is like society's responsibility in the fact that these systems have failed so many of these young people. And I'm now meeting them, they're in these life sentences, and it's like there were so many off ramps on that course of getting to where they went that were not available to them because of the flaws in the system. And I remember, people were, even some of my peers, when they knew that was the work I was doing, they were just like, how, what about the empathy for the victim? It's like there's many victims in this scenario. Like this is not just one victim. There are many victims in the scenario. And when you think about that kind of controversy of defending people that maybe the norm would say, why are you defending them? How do you kind of navigate the dual truths of situations like that?
I mean, it's twofold. One, every case that I take on, I have to view it, and every case is supposed to be viewed as the person is innocent in the lesson until
Yeah.
they are proven guilty. And that decision comes at the very end of the case. So, like, while I'm
Right.
defending someone, they're presumed innocent. And if you believe in the system and you believe that all of us have the right to be presumed innocent unless and until the state can prove otherwise, then, you have to put the state to the burden of proving
Yes.
otherwise, which is what defense lawyers do, right? We don't
Yes.
invent evidence. We don't go and destroy evidence. We're not
Yeah.
that's not the system that we have here in Canada. We have a system where we're just putting the crown to the test and putting the
Yeah.
police to the test because and most people would agree they don't want to live in a police state. We don't want to live in a
No.
world where work really, really hard, and the state can just send in some troops to break into your house and take
Yeah.
whatever you've spent a lot of time acquiring. They need
Yeah.
a reason, and they need
Yeah.
justification, and they need authorization in order to do these things. And so
Yes.
our job is just to make sure that the state does its job, the police do its their job, and when they do, people are convicted. And there's
Mm.
nothing we can do about it, right? Like
Yeah.
I can put the state to the test, but at the end of the day, once they meet the test, the judge is going to find the person guilty. And so then it's just a question of doing what we can to try to mitigate their sentence in accordance with their
Yes.
background situation.
Yes.
And understanding their background and understanding some of those precursors that resulted in their criminality, which is what you were
Yeah.
discovering through
Yeah.
your work, is
Yeah.
essential. I think the biggest gap that I see right now is that we don't have the rehabilitation built into the penal system that would allow for most people to get the assistance they need to make better choices later. And so
Yeah.
we have this sort of this cycle of recidivism that isn't being interrupted by the prison system the way that most people think, right? Like
Yeah.
when I speak to people who aren't a part of the criminal justice system, they believe that drug addicts get rehab in
Yeah.
jail. They do not.
Yes.
They and maybe they have access to a 12-step program, but it's nowhere near the level of rehabilitation necessary. I just, a couple of months ago, I went into Vanier Corrections, which is
Mhm.
like a remand center for women in Brampton outside of Toronto. And I was doing like a professional development day with some of the social workers there.
Yes.
And they told me they are not allowed to offer trauma therapy to the women who come into the jail. Which is, like, unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. How do
Yeah.
you not offer trauma therapy to a
Yeah.
segment of the prison population that is probably the most at
Most
need,
traumatized.
right?
Yes.
Women going into custody have probably experienced more trauma in their
Yes.
lifetime than, some communities
Yes.
put together
Yes.
in the city, and it's just not there. So you can't
Yeah.
be surprised when they come out and then they return and they return and they return because we're
Yeah.
never getting to the underlying roots of criminality.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And, I remember one particular inmate that I was working with said that, he came in like what he called like a bit of a rookie criminal, but after his first sentence, he was a better criminal. Like literally prison taught him to be a better prisoner, like to be a better, like in criminal behavior. And again, that piece about the misconceptions about what experience is. And also, the vast majority kind of thinking that there's, everything is equitable, but we know that the system as it is right now, that there is over representation of certain populations incarcerated states, and these are things that continue, that we don't necessarily see. We call it a wicked problem in education, where we don't see a one way to fix this. It's complicated. And what happens when I hear what you're saying in terms of your role is basically to, like, put the information forward, to use the information that to kind of hold the state accountable to be able to make the decisions. But what happens when the state isn't, we don't have trust in that anymore? When people have had experiences where they've been let down by, and not just, I'm thinking about not thinking about like just the criminal justice system, but any type of government system or any type of structure where we've put our confidence or our faith in it, and it says it's going to do a thing, and then we lose trust in a system.
I mean, I don't think that there's any system that is flawless.
Right.
We're dealing with so many different variables. Should there be, for example, no wrongful convictions? Of course. And I think everyone can agree with that. And I
Yes.
think that every time there is a wrongful conviction that gets overturned, there is a careful examination of what went wrong, how this went wrong,
Yeah.
how to fix this, because nobody wants a world where that exists, not only for the individual who's wrongfully convicted, but for society in general,
Yeah.
right? Those of us who follow the law need to know that we're not going to end up in jail unnecessarily. It's what
Yes.
ensures compliance with the law, is
Right.
knowing that, that's the reward of not breaking the law, is that we
Mhm.
don't go to jail. And so if people thought that they could just randomly be pulled off the street and sent to jail, people would not en masse follow the law, right? And so
Yes. Yeah.
we as a society want that to continue. And so I think that there's always a constant negotiation of where are the failings and how do we fix it. And I don't know that we're ever going to get any system perfect. I think that there's
Right.
always going to be people that fall through the cracks. Should they?
Mhm.
No, it's not an
Of
excuse.
course.
I'm at all saying that this is just, oh, we should just accept it. No, it's always being changed. But we only know about the breaks when someone falls through that crack, right?
Right.
That's how we learn, oh shit, there's a break there.
Yeah.
We got to fill that.
Yeah.
So I think it's constant. I think that the biggest failings, and I'm thinking about like the child welfare programs,
Yep.
when we know that it's not working and we're still not fixing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there are so many examples of
Mhm.
ways in which children especially have been, maintained in abusive homes, that
Yes.
have not been removed when they should be, that are not properly housed where they should be, that we don't have the supports for them. Right now, I don't understand how we aren't providing detox and rehab to people who want it and need it.
Mhm.
And I I speak to so many people that are caught in that cycle of addiction, and they want to get help, but they don't have the wraparound support that
Mhm.
everyone who works in that industry knows they need.
Yeah. Which is just wild to think that the person that's asking for help is basically left in that position where they can't access it, knowing how different it would impact their life, and also like preventing them from going farther and deeper into some of those places and spaces. And what you said just a moment ago about just that kind of toxic conformity, where it's like we know it is broken, but we just like just keeps on getting funded. It keeps on going in the nothing seems to change. That toxic compliance, it's so hard to witness it, and I think a lot of people feel pretty helpless, to know like what they can do. And and I'm just curious, if somebody wants to be an ally, if somebody wants to help, where do we start? Where is it that you think or you've seen where we can have some traction, where we can actually make efforts to make it better, especially when it comes to the children's welfare system?
No, I mean, I think people just need to speak out more
Yep.
about it. I think that it cycles through the media and everyone just sort of shrugs it off because
Yeah.
it's overwhelming and we don't know where to start. So I think that there needs to be, things spoken more openly. It starts politically, when I think about the amount of money, for example, that Toronto is spending as a city on keeping people addicted under the guise of like safe use.
Yeah.
It's frightening. We as taxpayers should not be okay with providing meth pipes and crack pipes to addicts. Instead, that money should go towards detox and rehab. And so it's
Yeah.
not about saying like, oh, forget that population, we shouldn't be helping them. No, like that's the dichotomy that is being presented to people, but it's false,
Mhm.
right? It's not about, oh, we shouldn't be caring for this segment of the population. We most certainly should. And I think we have an obligation to. But let's talk about what is actually going to help them long term,
Yeah.
as well as help the rest of society who's paying for them. Do we want to pay to keep people sick, or we want to pay to get people healthy?
Yeah.
And if you put it that way, people will 100% of the time say, no, 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 we want to get them healthy. We
Healthy.
want to create people that are healthy and working and then able to also pay in to the tax system so that we can all have, better existences.
Yeah.
And so I think that we have to speak out about it.
Yes.
And people aren't speaking out about it because people are like, oh, I don't want to suggest that, people shouldn't have safe places to go and shoot up. And why? Well,
Yeah.
it's really safe about fentanyl.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's just
Yeah.
not. You can't make it safe. Like, sure,
Exactly.
give people different ways to do it, but let's give people detox and rehab so that we can have them actually become healthy, not just safer in their addiction.
Yes.
So I think that, whatever strikes people as being the break or the breaking point in that system, we need to take a step back and not just be drawn into the dichotomy that the current government is trying to feed us,
Mhm.
and question what it actually looks like.
Yeah.
City of Toronto right now is in some real trouble, and there's a couple of really great organizations that are trying to use social media to shed light
Yes.
on what is actually happening. And so sometimes it's joining up with some of those groups,
Yep.
it's supporting those groups, And it's also looking at the issues above and beyond the way that they're framed for us at election time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Well said on so many fronts. And it's so fascinating when you look at the research around like harm prevention and reduction. It's like it's not this silver bullet where people think that, oh, they get to, they come in the center, they have a safe place to use, and then they get offered treatment. It's actually that's not what's happening. And
No.
the research is showing that actually that practice, there was like kind of some few studies that said that obviously harm reduction works in certain scenarios, but it was always with treatment followed after it. And what we're doing now is just that one part of it, but we're missing the key, which is getting them to the place where they are safe. So then that they would be they'd be able to access the treatment. So that's one of the pieces that I always find really fascinating is that people take pieces and parts out of research to say like, oh, this is what we should do. But when they've taken it out of a context and they're not doing the entire intervention that the study had done or that we've seen to be effective, it's really disheartening because when somebody quote fails rehab, it's made that they failed rehab versus like, well, relapsing is actually probably the most natural part of recovery. And again, it's Dr. Ross's work who does such a great job about when we normalize relapse as part of the process, especially in the early days, it completely transforms a person's experience. But if if they have this relapse early and then we're like, oh, look, you relapse, you're not a good candidate for another treatment program, that's actually not what the research actually shows. So there's lots of learning and unlearning, I think, that has to go about this. Now, I'm thinking about my listeners who have, are parents and supporters, and if they're worried about their kid, if they're like, you know what, Jordana, they're on the wrong track, like they might be concerned about their peer group or maybe just this, affect of just being kind of seems like they don't care about anything. And parents are worried about their kid right now. As somebody who has seen the other side and the consequences of when people go off track and when systems fail them, what would be your suggestion or advice or guidance if a parent is concerned about their kid right now?
I can't imagine being a parent right now. So I'm gonna answer your question with
Yes,
qualification that
yes,
I am not a parent and I
yeah,
am not
yeah,
necessarily equipped to do parenting advice. So I
right.
don't want to be like, this is the answer. But
Mhm.
there's certainly something to be said of exposure therapy,
Yes,
doing it really, really early. I
yeah,
think that I'm seeing kids younger and younger that are
yeah,
getting involved in the drug trade
yeah,
and like from all aspects, user, trafficker, whatever the case may be. And it's all part and parcel. And
yeah.
a lot of kids will be in, so I know.
Nope.
Here
Puppy
somewhere.
friendly. Puppies are welcome. Puppies are welcome on our podcast.
Yeah. And so I think that staying involved in your kid's life to your best of your ability
Yeah,
as a like preteen,
yeah,
is instrumental. Knowing who their friends are, knowing what they're doing on social media because social media is playing a huge role
yes,
in involving kids in criminal activity, especially drug related
mhm,
activity. I don't know that there's one thing that anyone can do that's going to prevent, but I've spoken to people who are a little bit younger than me, and their parents steered them away from drug use by literally exposing them to the
yeah,
worst of it,
yeah,
taking them on drives through some of the worst parts of the city, saying
yeah,
like, this is what the end result
yeah,
can be if you open up that door. And it's not about like, oh, just drugs will kill you, but the reality is they will. But before they do,
mm,
the existence you live is really awful.
yeah.
I don't think that there's anyone who has been in the throes of addiction that won't say, once it's bad, it's bad.
It's
And that
very
there's
bad.
no way to make it more comfortable.
Yeah,
There's no way to make it sustainable for a long period of time. And there's no way that that lifestyle in and of itself doesn't have negative consequences, even
totally.
apart from the health consequences that you're
Yeah,
then having to grapple with and likely for the rest of your life.
yeah,
And so I think that having those honest conversations to try to combat some of this sort of like safe talk
yeah,
around drug use, because it seems like, and I'm hearing from some parents as well, that their kids are just learning in school about how to identify drugs and use them safely. And it's
yeah,
like, no, why are we only having that conversation? Why aren't we having the conversations not about how to safely ingest cocaine, but like what might happen when you do?
yes. Yeah.
And, I can't imagine what it's like to be a parent in this culture where, you don't even know when you're buying cocaine, if it's actually cocaine or if it's got fentanyl in it.
Yeah.
We're seeing fentanyl in so many different types of drugs that it doesn't belong in.
Mhm.
And that's frightening.
Yeah.
Fentanyl wasn't around when I was using. I
Yeah.
don't know that I would still be here if it was.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Yeah.
I've continued to lose friends and anyways.
Yeah.
I think it's about staying very much actively involved in your kid's life, and I think it's having those difficult conversations that you may not want to, and not from a place of instilling fear, but, educating and being open and honest and saying, like, "I'm just worried, and I want you to understand the full parameters here," instead of trying to do that sort of, like, isolation and
Yes.
protecting them from what might be.
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very sound advice. And again, I'm mindful I'm putting you on the spot there, but just knowing who you work with, what you see, just that idea about like paying attention, right? Like just it blows my mind. I was just I shared with you before we went on the call that I was talking to a woman and her son is and going through a very complicated legal case, and she said that she's sitting there. First of all, there's all this stigma of the mother of a child who is, of a young man who has committed this crime or allegedly committed this crime. She's like, there's a stigma. But then she said, like, there are parts of that I'm hearing about his life that she had no idea. Like she
Right.
was completely blindsided. And you kind of have a moment again, not to put blame on other people in the situation. It's just that you hear all these examples and thinking like, how did you not see a few red flags? And again, not to put blame on the mother, especially, or the parent, but also just like, if you're showing up even just a little bit, with knowing who your kids' friends are, where they're going on the weekends, what they're doing, like chances are there's a few kind of indicators that they might not necessarily be in safe spaces and safe places with the kind of safe people. So I was just quite just again, I appreciated the stigma she already was experiencing, and that's not okay by any means. And also just this moment of just like how are so many people in this child's life just so unaware that this kid was in such a desperate state.
Well, I mean, I think, just to sort of feed up of that though, like parents right now are working a lot and
Yes.
life got really stressful for people. And I've had a couple of parents that have hired me in the last few years to represent their sons. And in one case, their daughter, and, they tried, they really did. And I don't think that um, I could have fault them for not seeing the signs. Sometimes kids just go from 0 to 100 really quick, and there's very little time to interrupt
Yeah.
that. And so
Yeah.
I think that having that relationship,
Yeah.
very early on, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old,
Yes.
recognizing the kids that are 11 and 12 and 13 may very well be starting to experiment with drugs, and from there it's
Yeah.
really easy for them to sort of hide what they're doing, and like I said,
Sure.
escalate very quickly. And once that
Yeah.
escalation happens, sometimes the parents lost all control. And so
Sure.
I think it's a really difficult scenario that we're in, especially at a time where you know you, most households are have two working parents, right, for financial reasons. And so when no one's
Yeah.
home to be there for the kid after school, it's you can't see what you can't see.
Yeah, no, of course, and totally fair. And do you, in your work and in your practice, do you see that when you're at that really extreme end, when you're navigating cases that involve like the violence, the homicides, is drugs often a component? Like, is that one of those? Is it safe to say, or is it probable to say that there's often drugs are involved in terms of these scenarios? Like, so, and what I'm thinking about that is just if we're addressing that piece around that, is it going to also have this secondary effect of mitigating and minimizing the potential that they would be involved in violence?
I mean, for sure, drugs and violence go hand in hand. There's no question that people, who have been using drugs or who are coming off of drugs, some do act violent, but not all. Some people it calms them down
Yeah.
and acts as a way for them to just sort of manage their own emotions. So I certainly wouldn't want to put a filter to suggest that like one necessarily leads to the other. Um, you know, violence, like victims of childhood violence will often turn to drugs as a way to just cope with their feelings without becoming violent themselves. And sometimes it's the opposite.
Yeah.
Sometimes they do become more violent. So I don't think that there's necessarily one template, but I certainly have done a lot of cases where drug use has led to violence, and certainly drug trafficking often leads to
Right.
violence. So we see, a lot of the shootings in the city and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Um, People who are just don't have the wherewithal or the emotional intelligence to control, to have the control over their emotions that they need, and therefore the
Yeah.
control over their behavior. So, it certainly
Yeah.
is and can be a factor, but I don't think it's determinative.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. And again, the just the world that you work in and how you show up, I feel like I take such comfort in knowing that you care so deeply about the people that you serve, and that idea of that you again hold the system accountable, and that we can have confidence that again that people have people like you in their corner, not trying to quote, I feel like there's that misconception of like, oh, the defense attorney trying to get them away, get them, let them off or get them off this thing, like understanding that there is a system and a process, and that we learn and we show up and we hold the system accountable. Like I find that just really just assuring to know that people like you are doing this work, and also that you just have a deep level of understanding and compassion of the person and the behavior. And so I just again, as I said, you are the badass bass I have ever met in my entire life in the work that you do. Like I'm just awe-inspired on how you show up and how you've taken your setbacks and created this set up for this big bright future that helps a lot of people. And this is just totally like a last like random curiosity question. Now, media and like television, they have lots of portrayals of defense attorneys. Like obviously there's all the shows and usually Dick Wolf's name's at the end of it. Are there any like these ones that just like irk you something fierce in terms of like how your profession is portrayed in television, that you could like help us have just a little bit of an insight of what it is like somebody with your skill set, your training, your experience, your expertise, your credentials, watching some of these shows. And I'm not even sure if you even watch them, Jordana, but like, what are some of the things that they get so wrong that you wish people would know?
I mean, I think that people we watch television and it's like, oh, the lawyer gets the file, and you have two types of lawyers. You either have the lawyer that gets the file and is going to do this amazing job in like 35 minutes and just
Mhm.
win the case. These cases take years.
Right.
They really develop over time. And then you have the portrayal of the defense lawyer who walks in and picks up the file the morning of and just sort of like slogs their way through it. And I think that's also a misconception, at least here in Canada. Like
Yeah.
that's not our system, even for people who are, taking lawyers on legal aid, for example. Like you spend years with these clients, especially if it's like a homicide case or,
Mhm.
a very serious drug traffic case, a large project case. You spend years building the relationship, understanding who the client is, understanding what the case is about, working the case and, really trying to develop that defense. Like nothing happens that quickly and nothing happens that dramatically as what we see on TV. And I think one of the biggest
Mhm.
misconceptions that young lawyers have is they're going to come in and there's all of this glamour, but there's actually a lot of really hard, difficult work that comes in. And I do my best to try not to ever take on the role of social worker or life coach. And I think that there's a lot of this misconception in
Yes.
society that, the defense lawyer is somehow to blame or somehow defending the behavior or not defending the behavior. Like, there's no defense lawyer that's going to
Yeah.
say that they're going to defend like murder as a construct in society. It's we defend the
Yes.
case to keep the state
Yes.
accountable. And at the end of the day, there's nothing that we can do to win the case if like I said, the state has done the job that they need to do and the witnesses are being honest and everything sort of lines up.
Yes.
When cases fall apart, it's because those elements fall apart. It's because the Crown's case falls apart. It's because the police got the
Yes.
narrative wrong. That's what happens and
Yes.
that's what
Totally.
should happen. in order to protect us all. So I think that, sometimes people need to take a step back from the case itself and just look at the philosophy of the system in order to understand the role that defense lawyers actually play. And I think, we started off talking about my TED talk, but I truly believe it. We have to understand the person's character and the person's circumstances and the person's upbringing in order to properly understand the complexity of who they are, instead of just judging them on the headline that we read about the case, which could very well be the worst thing they've ever done on the worst day of their life in the worst situation they've ever been in. And I've had those cases, and you realize like
Yeah.
what this person may or may not have done in that moment is not anything close to who they are as a human. And we're so quick to judge people, and we need to just take a minute to understand the full extent of their information and then make a judgment. And if you reach the same conclusion, that's okay, but do it from a place of information.
Well said, Jordana. Thank you so much. We have gone so over time, but oh my goodness, I appreciate you on so many different levels. We'll make sure to put information in our show notes about how people can check out your TED Talk. I would love to see that TED Talk just blow the charts up again, because it is so valuable. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I look forward to our paths crossing again so we can keep these conversations going. And again, thank you for the hard work that you do. Thank you for spending time with me on this episode of Life by Design. I appreciate if you have a moment to pay this forward, share it with someone who you think might benefit from the ideas shared in this episode. If you're feeling so inspired, please also rate and review the podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. Take good care, and I'll see you next time.